We get to the health food store and he says, I'm going to tell everyone what's healthy in a health food store. What is it? And all I was thinking to myself was, I hope he doesn't take us over to the produce section, because I hated the taste of fruits and vegetables. Did I tell you that? So take a wild guess where he took us. Right over to the produce section, of course he would. And he says, here it is, fruits and vegetables. This is all you need to be healthy again. I'll never forget, I asked him, I said, what happens if we don't like the taste of fruits and vegetables? I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, who are you? I told him who I was, and I told him what I was doing. I said I had something called inflammatory bowel disease, and I would like to learn more about getting well, and can you help me? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Well, I told him I want to get well. He said, oh, we can get rid of that with no problem. I said, no, I don't want to take my colon out. He said, why would you say something crazy like that? I said, because that's what my doctors told me is the only cure. He said, no, he's from a place called the Hippocrates Health Institute, which without knowing it, and never hearing of raw foods before, I moved right next to. And he told me about the raw food diet for the first time in my life. And he told me to go pay a visit to the Hippocrates Health Institute, and it would be fine. And I told him I can't eat raw foods. He said, why? I said, because my doctor told me it wasn't good for my condition. He said, exactly why you should do it. So I went and paid a visit to the Hippocrates Health Institute, and that fellow, by the way, was Brian Clement, who was here recently, who I've become very good friends with. So I went over to the Health Institute, and I'll never forget the first day there, I saw a lady in a wheelchair. And I was just thinking to myself, this can't be a good place. This lady's in a wheelchair. If it's so good, why would she be like that? Well, I got a whole bunch of books that day, and I went home to study them. 3 weeks later, I went back there to go inquire more about the program, and I saw what was either this lady's twin sister or this lady had a miraculous recovery. She was running. She was running. And I said to myself, this place is so bad that she's running to get out of here. But I actually realized it was the same lady, and she did have a recovery. And Hippocrates Health Institute was a 3-week program where they put people on a raw food diet, and they get people better from all types of illnesses and so on. So I was very intrigued, and I was very enthusiastic about doing this, and I was excited. I was about 99% sure I was going to do this, but I don't do anything without being 100% sure. So I wanted to be 100% sure, but so before I went and did this, I had to hear it from one more person. So I called my doctor up in New York City, and I said, I'm going to cure myself from inflammatory bowel disease. She said, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm going to go on a raw food diet. Will this help me? She told me exactly what I needed to hear to stay this path. She said, there are no medical studies to prove this will work. In fact, it's bad for somebody with your condition. When she told me that, I knew I was on the right track. That's the last time I spoke to her. I went on a raw food diet. I've been doing this now for about 17 years or so, 15 years, I don't even know anymore. And people ask me, how long did it take to get well again? And I give them 2 answers. The first answer is immediately. Because as soon as I stopped eating the garbage I was eating and replaced it with the raw, ripe, fresh organic produce, I got well. I started to feel better. And the other answer is, after all this time, I'm still healing. Because each day I feel better than the last. So I'm still healing. Well, I had all this information out and everything else, and I was so excited to get this information out. I gave a new meaning to the word zealous. I sadly say I turned more people off to this way of eating than I can mention. Because I was the crazy guy that stood in front of the supermarket and told people they were going to die if they kept eating that way. And I was like, people were running away from me, they didn't want anything to do with me. And I got to be known as that crazy guy in West Palm Beach. And nobody wanted to talk to me. And I said, this isn't good. I actually had to move. I had to move somewhere where people wouldn't think I was crazy. So I moved back to New York City. And I promised myself I wouldn't talk about this ever again. I would do it, but I wouldn't talk about it. And I got into I like to go to the gym in the morning because you don't have to stand and wait for a bench or wait for weights. So I would go to the gym early in the morning before other people would be there. And I was going to the gym early in the morning one day on the subway, and there was a lady there, a young lady on the train. It was about 5 a.m. in the morning. And she looked real young, and I had nothing better to do, so I started talking to her. And she was working on the train. She worked for the transit authority, and I said, how are you? You got beautiful skin, and you look really young and stuff. It turns out she wasn't young. She was a grandmother. She had 3 grandkids, and she's working a night shift for the transit authority. I said, how are you able to maintain this and do this? And when she gave me the answer, I thought I was on candid camera. She said she's on a raw food diet. 5 o'clock in the morning, on a subway, somebody else told me they were eating a raw food diet. That didn't know me. And I'll never forget, I looked at her, and I said, is anyone else doing this in New York City? And she said there were 2 groups doing it at the time. One was Matthew Grace, who had a group in New York City, and the other one was David Jubb, who has a place in New York City now. And they're both authors, and I went to their groups, and I said, okay, I'll only talk about what I've learned within this group, because everyone else was just as crazy as me at that time in the group. So I was doing that, and everything was fine. I wasn't going to talk about it until a friend of mine called me up, who I lost touch with because he went away to medical school. So he didn't know my story, and he called me up one day out of the blue, and he said he wasn't doing too well. I said, what's the problem? He said he has something called inflammatory bowel disease. I've ever heard of it. I said, not only have I heard of it, but I've got cured of it. He said, did you get your colon removed? I said, no. I just changed my diet and my lifestyle and helped me. He said, that's impossible. I said, why? He said, because my doctor told me that there's no known medical cure for this, and that won't work. I asked him if he knew my doctor, and he said no. I said, you know, he just went to the same school she did, and that's what they teach in medical school. They don't cure disease, they control disease. That's what they do. And they control it as long as they could, and then they cut it out. Well, if we want to be healthy, we have to cut the doctors out. So what happened was, I proved to him, I said, look, I got well, and I got better, and here's what I recommend you do. Go on a juice fast. It has to be fresh juices. We'll take it day by day, and I'll help you. So he agreed to it. I said, it has to be fresh juices. I said, I'll help you with it. He said, no, I'm a doctor. I can do it all. I said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow morning. That evening, his mother called me up screaming at me, told me I tried to kill her son, and I better never call him again or she's going to call the police and have me arrested. And I was like, I don't know what happened, but I wasn't too curious to find out because I don't want to get arrested. Well, I got a call about a week later from the hospital, and it was from this fellow, and he said he's in the hospital, he'd like me to come visit him. I said, is your mother there? And he said, no. I said, okay, where are you? So I went down to go visit him, and I got in the room, and the first thing he said when I went in the room, he said, that crazy thing you told me to do with that diet almost killed me. I said, I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened, I'm never going to talk about this again, I'm never going to tell anyone about this again. He said, but I don't have colitis anymore. I said, wait a second, it worked, I'm going to tell everyone about this. He said, no. I came here and I got rushed to the hospital and they had to take my colon out. And I said to him, I don't know what happened, and I'm sorry, I'll never tell anyone about this. And I was never going to talk about this again for the rest of as long as I lived. But when I left the hospital that day, I asked him one question. And when he gave me the answer, it was right there that I decided I was going to, the rest of my life, to tell people about this, whether they think I'm crazy or not. And the question I asked him was, what fresh juice did you fast with? And his answer, Gatorade. What fresh glow-in-the-dark blue fruit will give you glow-in-the-dark blue juice? It's not out yet. I hear they're working on it. But let me tell you how bad Gatorade is, first of all. First of all, it's not fresh, and if you ask most people, they think it is. But it came in the 80s, in the early 80s, the Florida Gators, a college football team, used it to replenish their electrolytes after their workouts. But what they found out years later is many of those people that were on that football team started to suffer from disease at a young age. So instead of these geniuses taking it off the market and stop selling it, they mass marketed it, called it Gatorade, and now mass marketed all over the world. So that's just an example of what's happening. So I started teaching this everywhere. I wanted to get this message out to everyone. And at the time, I watched a lot of TV, and there was an infomercial on TV. Remember the first guy was the Juice Man? Remember that guy with the little energy and the small eyebrows? Then we had the other lady stop me on Saturday with Susan Powder. So all these infomercials on late night TV, and I said, I'm going to have an infomercial. I wanted it on daytime TV, but I didn't have the money. On late night TV, that's going to talk about the raw food diet and health and so on. Has anyone here seen my infomercial on late night TV? That's because I haven't had the money yet to do that either. I actually asked that question once, and somebody raised their hand and said they saw it. I didn't know what to say. I was speechless. Must be a vision or something. So I came up with the next best idea. I traveled the world interviewing people who've been eating this way for a very long time. And that's what this book is, interviews with people who've been eating the raw food diet for many, many years. One of those people is in New York City, Dr. Fred Bishie, or in Staten Island, who's become a very good friend of mine and taught me a lot. And then in this book, I interviewed more people who've been eating this way for a very long time. Then I went on to write a book about inflammatory bowel disease and how to heal all disease. And there's many tips in there, but the basic tip is stay as far away as possible from your doctor.